Today I answer to the question why writing music on human bodies, men and women. Let's say why I produced the project so-called Bodyscore. Bodyscore means a musical score written on the skin on men and women. This question has been asked me many times. This project exists since 13 years ago. So now it is quite a well-known project. The most seen page on my website is the page dedicated to the Bodyscore. And for people who are not artists or musicians, of course, for everybody, it's strange and speaking about a composer who writes music on the bodies. It's exotic because I write music on men and women coming from all over the world. But also because it's erotic, and we know how much erotism it's on the spread on the network. So many journalists from the field of music or photography or just people attached to art very often made interviews with me, and probably some of you have seen some interviews on the net, but generally they don't have access to my archives. So I take the opportunity to give the answer. Sometimes I give to some journalists, and my friends often they do not read French or Italian or English and vice versa. So I do in 3 languages. And mainly because many of you ask me this project and why of this project, and I take the time to describe it. And some of my friends, this is quite strange to me, some of my very close friends, those who really know my art and my music, they feel the Bodyscore project like a treason to the so-called interactive music or interactive art, as I'm wearing 24 hours a day my sensor for breathing. I'm permanently connected to internet. Thanks to this sensor I produce interactive music, generative music through the computer. I develop many algorithms to calculate complex structures. Okay, of course I do this kind of procedures. I still use a lot the computer to make quite complex calculation when I have to write music, but for writing music I decided, starting from 13 years ago, to not use the computer, not use the paper, but write music on bodies. That's why you ask me very often, and I hope that the video will answer to your questions. And I use in this video one word, the word sacre, sacrale, okay, like it's not belonging to the religions, like something that belongs to the access to the transcendency, à la transcendance. It means that as I said in several videos before, I feel the best way to get access to transcendency, à la transcendance, is writing. And for that reason, I found the best way to do it on bodies, on the living part of our relationships. So there is no reasons or no reason to go with the interactive art, because writing music is a step inside a long project, a long-term project, and writing is just a part of the music. Sometimes I use the computer to write some musical passages because it's faster and even better to calculate a complex spectrum of pitches of notes or some very complex rhythm. I use the computer, but when I have to think about the music, to think about what I'm thinking about the music itself, I find this way to write music on bodies. I hope so you can get access now to my archives. I remove anything that can be bad interpreted by this kind of network. So no problem, there's just some naked persons in a very soft way. And I took the time to describe everything about this special project. Since when I was a child, I was quite attracted by a specific part of Asian culture, that was the writing, the calligraphy. I wasn't able to define if something came from Japan or South Korea or China. I didn't care at the time. I was just able to recognize that it was a kind of writing completely different from the Italian one. And what attracted me very much was the fact that the way of learning how to write in the movies I could see all the time was often associated to martial arts, and also it was extremely different from the way of teaching how to write in Italy, the Italian alphabet. Thanks to some friends of mine, mainly artists from China and Japan, I understood quite quickly that I didn't want to practice a sort of simple esotism. As I go often in China or in Japan, then I write in Japanese or in Chinese. No, it was too simple. But thanks to them, I understood that what I was really interested in was the fact of writing in the calligraphy, and I could do in music. So I started to focus as much as I could on what my master taught me previously about music calligraphy. It is important to me to remind that in 2003 my master Luciano Berio died, and in 2003 I increased very much my travels and my trip into Asia, mainly in China, and I studied very much Chinese calligraphy in terms of quality of the intention. But in the same year I wrote my book, my manifest about my aesthetics, hypersystemic music. That was the apologia of computer-aided composition. It means music generated through the computer, algorithms, and so on. And in the same period, my editor invited me not to deliver him any manuscript. It means handwritten music. To the contrary, I was invited to deliver PDF. So there was a sort of dichotomy between studying Asian calligraphy and not writing music by hand. It was in 2007 when I wrote for the first time in my life the first Bodyscore. It was on the body of my girlfriend with whom I was living at the time. But the 2007, it's important for me because in the same year I published in France my manifest about my hypersystemic aesthetics, and the content from the Italian one or the French one was absolutely the same. But I was perfectly aware that many people, much more than in Italy, could have read my book in French. So for me 2007 represented a sort of closure of my formalized research based on computer-aided composition, and I needed something much more connected to the bodies. That's why I started in that period the Bodyscore project. For years, I've asked myself fundamental questions about my work, and at the same time, I ask myself many questions about my own life, especially in this very moment. Of course, I am a composer. I write and practice music, but I wonder how I can work within my chosen fields via the writing process. And I wonder more and more often what is the point of writing for real now in 2020, and what place is there for sheets of music or other old ways of writing music, because everything is mainly digital nowadays: computers, touch interfaces, networks, sensors, and so on. Let's compare the act of tearing up a sheet of music to deleting music from a hard drive. What a huge difference. There is nothing more ephemeral than the act of vehemently erasing a file from a computer. Click and delete. It's gone. How brave, how heroic, especially when we know that we can simply click undo to reserve the operation and get back to the file that has barely been erased. Because a sheet of music written on a computer has not really been written. It was typed and clicked. So I question my art, the music, my music written. I've just said old ways of writing, but maybe I should have called them ancient ways. For time, in some cases, makes the difference between old and ancient. It is felt and lies within the value that we attribute either to the object we are referring to or its era compared to the present time. I belong to a generation of composers ironically known as the pen-mouse generation. We know how to write for orchestra, string quartet, voice and so on paper, but also for concert where the computer is and the technology is everywhere. I compose the so-called mixed or interactive music in which classical performers, pianists, violinists, oboists, opera singers and so on, are on stage. They read and study music on paper, but they interact with the computers during the performances. This is the kind of music I like. it suits me best. It is the kind of music that I freely choose. But from the age of 6 until 2001, when I was 30 years old, I wrote on paper. The role of my publisher at the time was limited to make the photocopies of the scores, which needed to be written clearly enough to be read by musicians. Essentially, my publisher did the photocopies of my handwritten scores and distributed them to the musicians. So I had to learn to write my music neatly in terms of calligraphy, or it would not be played. In order to teach me how to write well, my maestro Ivan Fedele made me rewrite my first publicly performed piece 4 times before delivering it to the performers. Not because of the musical content, but because of the calligraphy. I was 15 years old. I was compelled to develop my own penmanship. Writing changes over time. It grows with age and experience. As in any calligraphy, each gesture is the vehicle of mood and the mental state of the artist. The handwritten score is the trace of the artist-composer who is expressing himself. Beyond the musical content, the score displays the emotional state of the composer. The handwritten score leaves a muscular memory inside the composer's body. A memory of my body that allows me to keep on remembering the place where I wrote all my scores until 2001. For before that year, scores needed to be handwritten well so they could be read and performed live. The term speaks for itself: musical calligraphy, a beautiful music writing. The score you're looking at in this very moment, it's a score about 25 years ago. It's a score of mine, and it is an example of the kind of quality of handwritten music I was used to do when I wrote on paper. In order to better express myself, now I will show you several scores handwritten by several composers from the past, like Beethoven, Mozart, Schubert, Schumann, Stravinsky, Liszt, and so on. Composers who took several decisions on the score, and you can see the quality of the intention that is written and that we can recognize by the traces that the composers left on the score. When writing by hand, it is necessary to be very focused to ensure the quality of the work and the visual quality within a given format. My teacher always told me, Jacopo, a clear writing reflects a clear mind. Therefore, expectations were always high, and I could not negotiate those. When writing by hand, an error, a mistake, a crossing out, an ensure, or a starting over all cost a lot of time. Therefore, we focus intently so that even if mistakes can happen, we aspire to remain within the creative flow for hours. It is a kind of psychic extension of being fully in the present moment, which the artist-composer knows so well. A state of concentration approaching trance, auto-hypnosis. Nothing exists but the music surrounding the artist. Time is like suspended, but not in the way people often think. It is a time so accelerated that it seems as if the composer is paralyzed by his own small gestures, which are precise, exact, and perfectly clear as they flow on the paper. A sort of enjoyment of act of writing the sound, the artist-composer finds himself composing for hours without perceiving effort, fatigue, or any other concerns other than the writing itself. Because there is only the mental simulation of the music that will be played, a form of pleasure in preview which only the composer knows, prepares, and plans. There is something very well known by musicians, but I would like to share with you. Since the advent of music notation, scores have always aroused the utmost respect in musicians and non-musicians alike. Because for musicians, the written score produces a sense in itself, the so-called musical sense. For non-musicians, the score represents the complex link between the imagination of an oral idea and the expression of this idea through others, the performers, before they have even read the music. For non-musicians, the musical score is a kind of indecipherable letter teeming with secrets. They are written, stripped bare, and yet unreadable. And while remaining undecipherable to non-musicians, the score is immediately recognized as music by everyone, including those who don't know how to read it. Knowing that a score displays so many of the composer's secrets, fantasies, illusions, dreams, nightmares, hopes and fears make it seems very intimate, limited to the private sphere. It expresses the composer's commitment to his music better than any other document in the same context. And yet, all of this can be revealed by the score's reader. The score is the privileged medium between composer and interpreter. The score is a codified handwritten link which indicates how to embody the emotions that the composer expresses through his creation. A sort of imagined potential expression of his life, and the score links the musicians with the composer in a sort of utopian possibility of expression, of communication. Of course, within a score we write notes and many other symbols, and these are the musician's instructions. But as Gustav Mahler said, in a score there is everything except the essential. What does it mean exactly? It's a score, it's much more. It is a physically body on which the composer writes by hand, corrects, highlights, and erases, leaving all kinds of traces. When writing by hand, drawing the line, filling all of notes dotted, thickening a line by drawing new ones over it, writing the instruction on how to play, F for forte, loud, P for piano, soft, drawing an expression, ties harmoniously or slicing sharp notes double cross are not gestures that can be confused with each other. They involve bodily mechanics that become distinct from each other during these micro-times and events. Those gestures also involve a different cognitive process each time. In a score for an orchestra, writing a flute line at the top of the page or a double bass line at the bottom is not of the page, of course, is not the same thing. When you write on the paper, the eyes cannot even reach or see these two opposite poles at the same time inside the score. They are even more frustrated by the presence of your own body looking at these lines at the bottom, following the writing rhythm from the top to the bottom, right to the left. I want to clarify this because writing music by hand involves specific cognitive resources, such as Umberto Eco said many times, and it moves for each symbol and sign, and they depend on a specific score topology. When you are writing by hand, nothing is equals nothing. Everything is always new. I perfectly remember when my maestro Luciano Berio was writing his last opera. In order to write to the bottom of the page or to the top of the page, he used a special chair that allows him to be on his knees, and he moves forward and backwards. At the end of this writing, he felt on his own bodies a sort of pain in his knees because he was bodily involved in writing by hand in this kind of big score. My master Luciano Berio, at the end of this opera, he had his own hands tired, but he also felt a sort of pain in his knees, something that we don't really think about when we write a score. At the same time, the score must be incomplete enough so that the performers can complete it within their own intentions and interpretations. Exactly such as Gustav Mahler said, in the score there is everything except the essential, because the essential is done by the interpreters. And each interpreter on the same score, this time of course edited or printed out, adds new signs, symbols, that will help them adapt the composer's intentions. The score is in the medium in which the interpreter can read the composer's intention codified in the form of musical writing. Thus, the emotions of the composer are entrusted to the performer, so they can relay them to the public, to the audience, via their musical instruments gestures. Indeed, even if that seems obvious, not many know that a score does not just show the music notes. Actually, for the musicians, these symbols imply hand, mouth, and lips position, feet, movements, ways to use their own bodies, and ways to move with the score's aforementioned instructions. In other words, the score says to the musician how to use the parts of their bodies, how to move them, with all possible instructions. Through the score, there is a sort of undeniable, established sensual relationship between the score and the body. I can tell you even more. Generally, a musician never touch the score or other people, and vice versa. I mean, scores are extremely private. We can show the score to other people. We can make the photocopies of our own scores for other people. We can offer a new score to other people, but we don't give our scores to the others. We don't let other people touching our score because they are private, extremely private. If I say movements, breathing, hesitations, uncertainties, impulses, efforts, tensions, relaxations, breathing, more breathing, how to breathe, how to move, when to stay still, softly, unhurried, crescendo, accelerando, rest, breathe. Repeat from the beginning, slow down, stop, rest, breathe again, repeat. Continue as long as possible, as softly as possible, rubando again, insistent, once again, louder again, as loud as possible, barely breathing, start over, always fortissimo, stop, tight tremolo, almost a trill, breathe, modulate calmly, not yet, restrain yourself, breathe with me, calm, almost motionless. Now, suddenly, serrando, stringendo, let the resonance ring, continue with a lot of resonance by changing the direction each time, breathe, repeat ad libitum without changing, to the top, pizzicato, always connected, straight to the end, legatissimo, adapt again, repeat, modulating from the top to the bottom, pushing, pulling from the top, from the bottom, marcato, detached, as precise as possible, an accent on each, on time, in time, on downbeat, always on the downbeat. Rest, now on the upbeat, staccatissimo, with your fingers, with the palm of your hand, with the fist, with your tongue, as fast as possible, fortissimo, even louder, still breathing, as before, syncopating, breathing in syncopation, the offbeat all together, ossia, solo, tutti, very softly, mouth closed, stifling every vibration, without vibrato, breathing together, motionless, immobile, touch it, rest. All this, written this way and read this way, does not resemble a musical score. And yet that's exactly what it is like. When the computer appeared in music publishing, something fundamental changed. While the musical content did not change, maybe not, calligraphy itself was banned. The drawn line was crushed by the font. The uniqueness of each artist's calligraphy was wiped out by the printable layout. In French, font translates to police de caractère. In this sense, it is as if calligraphy is now policed. When you write by hand, each gesture is unique. When you click, each click is identical to the next. The ontological difference results in deep cognitive mutations within a writer's hand. Within the act of writing, a dimension of notion of correction is extended to the ontological, psychological, and psychoanalytical aspects that are too often ignored. In music, there are three categories of corrections, if you want. They are completely different, and they are often ignored. The forgetfulness, the mistake, and the accident. It's important to underline these three aspects because we operate in a different way in front of them. The first is probably the most well-known. Forgetfulness means when you forget something, for instance, to write a sharp, or to write a link, to write some specifications. The second one is the most unlikely. It is when you really make some mistake and then you write something that cannot be played. And the third one is the accident that generally composers are looking for. Generally, forgetfulness and mistakes have to be corrected. It means that if you don't make corrections, musicians cannot perform them. So, in both cases, forgetfulness or mistakes during the rehearsals, generally, they are corrected directly on the score or in the separate parts. But for accident, it's different. While writing by hand, even though you are not being forgetful or making mistakes, you might get out of the pattern set by yourself when you are the composer. A composer is a bit like an architect that before he starts writing has thought for a long time before about how many rooms an apartment will have. If there will be a corridor, windows, where and how to reach a particular space, how many floors or a building should have, how to isolate one wing of a building from another, and so on. Usually, as you know, an architect first defines a project of a drawing and then draws the map. Now I can say to you that music is quite similar, with the composer defining the sections, the durations, the phrases, the half phrases, the harmonies, the trajectories, how to read the polyphonies, how to go from one phrase to another, and all of this before you start writing, of course. When you are writing by hand, when you are immersed in what I call the trance, level of concentration, when you let yourself be hypnotized by writing, you might lose sight of the general initial project. You might go beyond the initial pattern. This is called the accident, and the accident occurs within the difficult areas of creation. This is not the same thing as forgetfulness, but it shares some of its characteristics. From a certain point of view, the accidents are the result of forgetfulness and the mistakes, and they occur when choices must be made. I define this part of creation as difficult because you must decide whether you will correct them or not. In a way, it is difficult to choose between what was simply not planned and what, even though an individual produced it on his own, was simply never considered. An accident should not necessarily be corrected. It represents a thin line between what you want, what you know, and what you hope to find again. And even in this case, music and art in general, history, is filled with examples of accidents that artists did not correct, but instead they decided to keep and sign. Some artists, like me, seek these accidents, for they allow us to do towards what has not been done before and what is unknown, towards what it is ours as we made it ourselves, but we don't know yet. The accident is an healthy, unconscious state that allows us to stray from the well-known path, to discover new paths without getting lost, for while writing we always know where we come from. This way writing leaves a trace. With handwriting, corrected forgetfulness, mistake or accident always leave a trace that can be read. They are signed, displayed with the line that does not erase them but reveals that the writer chose to leave them out. When you reread a score written by hand with ink, the approved or unapproved choices represent the history of an artist's creative process. It is a memory of everything that an artist has been thought during writing. Many times the accident is so desired by the artist that remains uncorrected. Indeed, it is integrated, amplified. Sometimes it becomes the distinctive characteristic of a work, and in some cases, an artist's distinctive characteristic. In order to jump back to what my maestro told me, my mentor said, clarity of writing is equal to clarity of mind. Yes, of course, and when you compose on the computer, we can say that you can be sure that the writing is clear, it is imposed by the font police, but there is also anonymity of the mind. In this domain, digitalization has made it possible to correct forgetfulness thanks to plugins that quantify everything: sharp, notes, flats, accents, page layouts. The act of turning the page disappears. Thus, many cases of forgetfulness that lead to many spectacular events in musical history disappear. Not only that, but errors are also corrected right as they happen. With music writing software, it is impossible to write a rhythm that does not exist. In some cases, there even exist corrective functions that delete the possibility of pieces of music that are humanly impossible to play. Thus, mistakes have disappeared as well, but ignorance hasn't. The undo function, which allows you to go back to when you started at any moment while you are working, erases the detailed timeline of your choices. This function, as well the correction function or the quantifiers, are an ethical contradiction to creation. An artist makes choices, and choices represent consciousness. Without a detailed timeline, the so-called historicity, conscience is comparable to a mere animal taxis, an automatic disposition of the body and the mind without any possible change. To the contrary, with musical calligraphy, there is simultaneously clarity of writing, clarity of mind, and thanks to the uniqueness of each person's writing, a unique artist identity. This is why I would like to turn the type of writing that I am suggesting into the name of identigraphy, invoking each individual's identity. For me, the best way of getting transcendency is through writing, but if you erase with the computer, with the function undo, every historicity of your writing, how you can be sure that you are looking for your transcendency? How you can be sure that every time you make a choice, you are sure about your choice? While I can perfectly remember when and where I may have written my scores before 2001, after that date I can't always remember the exact place or time of their writing. For one score in particular, I can't even remember the reason I wrote some parts of it. To be more precise, in 2007 I wrote my second string quartet, and I'm really not proud about what I'm telling you, that I do not remember why I wrote some passages in that score. Probably because I remember that because I was traveling at the year, I was already traveling all around the world, and so by train, by plane, I used to write everywhere. I also wrote my aesthetics, in which I wrote a sort of tribute to computers, laptops, computers, thanks to which I could write anywhere, in the airports, planes, trains, train stations, waiting room, and so on. And now I know that this is exactly the reason why the undo function is a form of abuse. Because when you are writing in a train, wagon, or in a plane flying towards another continent, even if you are in business class, it doesn't change. To the contrary, probably is even worse. When you are doing these kind of things, writing in between two classes, between two appointments with students, between various staff meetings, concentrations accepts doubt. I'm not referring to Cartesian doubt as a method of research. I'm actually referring to the doubt that appears when you are dealing with the indistinct, the confusion of things, states, moments. The confusion that fills the empty spaces and lets time pass by with such an indifference that the opportunity to correct becomes an obligation. And in 2007, when I wrote my string quartet, the second one, something happened in my mind. Despite the fact that I followed all the rehearsals with the musicians, I followed them with my laptop, creating sounds, interactivity, since the dress rehearsals. After the dress rehearsal, I really understood that the second section of my string quartet was something I never thought about. I didn't even know to tell people or to myself why I wrote that passage. So I went to the first violin, Guillaume, and told him, please, Guillaume, during the concert, please, just skip that section. He asked me if I was crazy because the concert was just 3 hours after. And I said, no, you don't have to add some music. I just ask you, when you finish the section A, you just turn several pages and you skip the B and you start again with the section C. And it was the case. They did so. This experience was quite disturbing to me because generally when you write string quartets, you should be extremely careful and extremely conscious of what you are writing. And having written a string quartet in which the second section was completely anonymous for me was really not only disappointing with myself, but also, let's say, depressing. So I started a new field of research, and I thought really a lot. For a long while, I searched for answers to this question for a long time: how to reclaim the balance between writing and producing, which always requires a computer, how to get back to the extreme concentration with all expectation I am familiar with, what to do about the intrusion of the undo function, and how to give more space to the expansion of the present. So I have taken my research towards subjects very different from aesthetics, but very close to ethics, ontology, psychoanalysis, sociology, anthropology, and even botany. While not denying my aesthetic roots based on generativity and interactivity, and not betraying the systemic and hypersystemic roots of my work, which have stayed with me since the day I created them myself, I have created a new practice for the moment of writing and the writing of the moment. So, when back at home, my girlfriend at the time asked me, because I was quite depressed, asked me, Jacopo, write on me your next composition. Yes, on her skin, on her back. And I did it. And of course, it was an erotic situation. She was my girlfriend. We lived together. But I don't want to reduce the fact to the eroticism. I want to say something more. Through my different researches, I have to come to understand that the experience of the present moment is life itself. Of course, it could be simple, but not to me. The living body is an extension of the present moment. The living organism breathes, moves, evolves, and adapts. It is permanently changing, maturing, aging, transforming, and metamorphosing, and every phenomenon lived by the body leaves its mark. The body is both the living and the physical memory of the living. As in life, sometimes there are dumps, wrinkles, scars. A body that breathes along with me inevitably magnifies the very moment we share. And if the body is nude, a sensual link is established. Because a man's or woman's nudity always implies intimacy, again, the private sphere, the personal sphere. This intimacy, this privacy, this personal bond cannot be found everywhere and cannot happen only by coincidence. It cannot be subjected to the plugins of quantification or to the function undo. So, starting in 2007, so now it is almost 13 years I'm doing it, I write my scores on human bodies, men and women. At first, these were experiments I did with my partner, alone at home, quite privately. Because, yes, I have to say it, I was afraid. Because in music, nudity, still nowadays, it is a problem. As you know, I belong to the field also called classical contemporary music or contemporary classical music, based in concerts that happen in the very prestigious concert halls. And in these concert halls, musicians are really overdressed when you think how they come on the stage and how do they perform. And in a way, nudity is really into the opposite field about this overdressing. I remember perfectly in Festival of Salzburg, I was attending the opera of Schönberg, Mois und Aaron, where in a moment there are four virgins coming on the stage that have to be sacrificed, and often these virgins comes with the breast naked, and in that case you can feel in the audience, wow, I can see a nipple, like it was something completely unattended, unexpected, you see. And this mainly because nudity is often associated to erotism or to erotic situation. Of course, music is erotic by definition because it is the most ancient art based on the seduction. Seducere in Latin means bringing to you, to yourself. It means music by its nature is absolutely the art of bringing people to you. In a way, music is completely erotic. And as music, it is completely, let's say, not abstract because it's a concrete phenomenon. Sounds, of course, but let's say that music it's without images. So when you listen to a music, automatically you create your own images, and this is one of the reasons why music is by itself an erotic art. But I want to add something very not well known, the difference between orgast and orgasm. I don't know, I didn't find in English this distinction, but it exists in French, so I'm sure it should exist also in English. Orgast with the T, it is the physiological discharge of the body when you are in a erotical situation. To the contrary, the orgasm with the M, it's the sentimental, emotional discharge that, of course, it's connected to the physiological one, but it is mainly mentally. I could resume saying that the orgast is the pure sexual part of an organism. To the contrary, the orgasm is the sentimental part of an organism, of the body in this case. In other words, the orgast is the sex side, and the orgasm is the love side. So this can be together, okay, but they can be separated. In a way, in front of art, as music it is art, you can have orgasm. It's like you were in a loving situation, not in a sexual one. Nudity have been always taken in account in art. Let's think to the very ancient examples of sculpture or painting in which you can see naked people living because it's natural. Of course, nudity in the history of humanity, because of the religions, all of them, or because of Puritanism, or because of any kind of reform or counter-reform and so on, has suffer of many different way of receiving it. So many times nudity has been how can I say avoided, excluded, forbidden because people were afraid of speaking about nudity. And probably you know better than me that this being afraid about nudity is absolutely actual, current nowadays. It's alive. You can see on this kind of stuff you are using the internet, like in the social networks, where if you put a nipple or I don't know, a penis, automatically you are banned, you are blocked. Your profile is wow, this is a scandal. But on the same network, you can see any kind of images belonging to erotism, nudity, art, or pornography. So. And for all these reasons, as I was hanging out with a lot of artist friends from the field of fine arts, where nudity in painting, in sculptures, in movies, in photography is not, it's never been a problem. To the contrary, in music it is, and nowadays too. So at the very beginning, I was scared. I was afraid to be considered a sort of strange, sort of pervert composer that writes music on body. So at the beginning, I write only on my girlfriend or my partner alone at home because I was really afraid about people judgment. So, as I said before, Since 2007, I write music on bodies, men and women. They come to my studio so that I may write on them. The nudity, the skin, its porosity and proximity have the explicit sensation of closeness, of being in contact. You can almost feel the skin breathe. I write by hand in ink. But the canvas, the human body, is far from ephemeral, and I cannot undo what I write. Correction is eradicated. Accidents must always be taken into account, but cannot be corrected. It must be integrated. It must be accepted. So that the vitality of writing process is preserved by the inability to correct and by the sacredness of the presence of the naked models. Since 2007, all my works exist only through sketches written on men's and women's bodies. The only relics of the work are the photos that are transcribed as scores on the computer, after, of course. Now that I can have the right perspective of time, I remember that in 97, so it means 10 years before starting the Bodyscore, I've seen the movie The Pillow Book by Peter Greenaway. This movie that if you don't know, you should see it. It is really a masterpiece. And it is a movie about Asian calligraphy, mainly Chinese calligraphy. And in this movie, you can see how men and women discover the art of writing on human bodies, men and women all the time. In this movie, you can see how the artists write poems on naked body, men and women, and they take the inspiration from the energy of these bodies. For sure, the Pillow Book remained in my mind, in my memory, and after some years, I look at it again because I remember how it was done, this movie, but I wanted to look at it again. And so that I started to discover also other movies belonging to previous periods that I ignore completely. So I discovered the movie by Kenji Mizoguchi, the Japanese movie maker. The film it was Utamaro and His Five Women. If you don't know this movie, really, I suggest you to look at it at least once. And this is the history about a painter that one day was attracted by the skin, by the back of, for sure, a magnificent woman, and he asked to this woman if he could realize a painting on her. And what is extremely well done in this movie is that you can see how the painter takes the inspiration by the body of this person, and also he declares that the painting he will have realized will breathe differently, belonging to the state of emotions or the sentiments of the person on which this painting has been done. He created a sort of living painting because the painting was on a body. These two movies, the one from Peter Greenaway and the one from Mizoguchi, were quite inspiring for me, not only for how to write something on bodies, but mainly how to prepare the bodies on which I would have written my music. So now I can describe better the word I used before, like sacred or sacredness, belonging to why I do write music on naked body. First, it is important to know and to understand that thanks to this new practice, the Bodyscore, writing music, I found back all the level of expectation that my master taught to me. And now I can really describe you the word sacré, sacred. The model's nudity and participation is indeed sacred because the writing session, for instance, lasts between 6 and 12 consecutive hours without interruption. There is no room for distraction, rest, or inconveniences. This practice could be called breathing together, because while I draw the lines, symbols, notes, and markings on the score on body, The models breathe with me at the same tempo, at the same rhythm. Sometimes I ask the model to remain immobile so that the ink lines remain pure, clean and precise. No mistake is admitted, as correction is impossible. That way I have transcended the very notion of writing as a performance. As with all performance, there is no room for distraction, dispersal and errors. When I am composing over a body, everything is present. The score breathes with me. Sometimes the body's asperities force me to make choices, make decisions I had not planned at all. The notion of the accident as an unexpected source of creativity gets back its place and its importance. The same importance that the undo function in my musical practice has erased. While the topology of the score influences the writing, do you remember when you're writing the flute part, or my master wrote the flute part and the double bass part in the big score for orchestra? Do you remember it, no? So the morphology of a body influences the choice I want to make even more. You cannot write uniformly everywhere on a body. There are more fragile areas, more powerful ones, other more delicate, other less comfortable. Body, while its anatomy is well known, is a breathing topology, displays a morphology that lends itself well to accident, a form of topography of living made of areas that may or may not be explored. Writing on a new model means much more than writing on a new page. As a temporary tattoo that can disappear with water, this new practice has the only chance of survival in photography. But while it is ephemeral because of how fast it disappears, calligraphy over a woman or a man's body bears an inherent duality. From the moment I start writing, knowing that what I wrote will disappear in the next hours, I am aware that this hand gesture is the most important moment of my work, the one where my work ties itself to the present moment. As soon as I start writing, each choice appears on the surface of a moment that passes and leaves its mark on a breathing skin. This is how I realized that writing was a form of slow improvisation. I'll repeat it. Writing, it's a slow improvisation that leaves a mark that can be read. And since that mark is extremely fragile, the tattoo, ephemeral tattoo done on a body, photography is what can give us a chance to save it. All the interactions I have by the feeling of the living body is something that I need nowadays and that I never found on paper or on a computer. As I told you before, at the beginning I work quite privately with my partner, with my girlfriend. And I never show to people my pictures because they were quite technical pictures, photos. But as this project has a quite of huge importance and quite a big resonance, I start working with photographers, the professional one who took the photos. And I work with 4 photographers, 2 women and 2 men, and every time there was some problem. The main problem is that in the field of photography, the person who takes the photo is the owner of the project or the photos. Even if I thought everything, if I wrote the score, I imagined the project and so on. So I started studying photography to be independent, to avoid any kind of problem. I started to do my own photos, but I do not feel myself as a photographer. I am a composer. I say this because, yes, of course, I did some exhibition of photography and I will do it again. The very last one was in Japan, in Chanel House, and I did in Paris, in Photo Fever, in Rome, in Beijing, and so on. But for me, showing photos means another way of showing my scores, my music. So this practice mainly happens in my house, in my atelier in Paris. Models come to my house. I focus for days before knowing what I want to write, and I choose by myself on which person I will write this particular music passage. A very recurrent question is, how do I choose the models? It's very simple. Models mainly are dancers, actors, photographers, painters, artists in general, musicians, of course, and I choose them because of their own bodies. Generally, I don't know. I sometimes I need some muscular tensions, something that is quite exotic, coming from far from my culture. I need some very thin bodies or some very powerful ones. Sometimes I look for some shapes that are close to music instruments or to some water animals, and I take the inspiration for their bodies. Because one of the main points of my aesthetic is the other, okay, other people. And so in this project, I take the inspiration from the other people body. I focused and I concentrate myself really a lot before models come to my apartment. And I defined a certain number of rituals in order to put the moment of writing in a sort of sacred moment, in a sacredness situation. Because, as I said before, I cannot do anywhere, and I don't want to do it anywhere. I define really a series of protocols, we could say, or let's say rituals, in order to make a distance between the moment the models come in my house and the moment they are naked and the moment I write on them. I create around me a sort of black box in which I can focus perfectly. And when I do the Bodyscore session outside of my flat, it was the case in Chanel house, for instance, where I asked to recreate in real size the situation I have in my home to make the calligraphy and photography sessions. The first ritual consists in defining with the model the shape of the body that will be taken in the photo. I do three kinds of photography. The first one, that I call Neanderthal. It means the very basic pictures through which I take all the parts of the music because I need them in order to transcribe it for the musicians on the computer. This first kind of pictures, the so-called Neanderthal, where you can see really the skin, is not that interesting for people. But sometimes when I could show really well the details of the skin, I show also to people. The second kind of pictures I take is the so-called aesthetic photo. It's mainly the reason why models come to my atelier, because they want to have this kind of photo. And first I take the so-called blank page, white page. Mainly it is a very technical photo that I show to the model because I want to be sure that he or she wants to be recognized on that picture. Very often these photos are exhibited inside a photo exhibition or during the concerts, and I want to be sure that the model, as it is naked, or she's naked, I want to be sure that they accept it to be seen in that specific situation. That's why we define together with the model. The next ritual is to declare to the model exactly, showing with my hand or touching with my hand where I will write the score. This because I want to reach the utmost respect about the project I do, and I want to avoid any kind of ambiguity. So I define really where I will write, and so that the model can say to me, yes, I agree, or do not agree. Because as I have to write on naked person, can happen that I touch a nipples with my hand or with my arm, and I want to be sure that no problem will be there. Then, belonging to the rituals, there is the one during which I clean the skin. This is not strange, this is very technical and pragmatical. Inch by inch and step by step, I really clean all the part of the body on which I will write. In this way, I attempt two steps, very important. The first is that the model trusts me as much as possible, because I starting touching the person exactly where I will write. And secondly, I start knowing the body on which I will write few minutes after. So the first ritual is the blank page. The second one is to clean all the parts of the body, and the third one is to dry the body. In this case too, it is extremely formalized how to draw the body. This because nothing is random or chaotic, extremely ponderated, extremely sacralized, so that the model can trust me completely, and I can trust also the model. Since when I started this project, I can say now I worked on hundreds of people, men and women coming from all over the world. So I can write on people, black people, white people, but among the white people or the black people, they are completely different. If you take a person from the North Europe or South Europe, people coming from Asia, coming from Africa, so you can understand why now I'm telling you that every time it's different, every person is different. If I have to write a long phrase, I look for one only long line that joins the foot to the ankle to the leg to the waist to the side to the shoulder, and so on until the hand or the fingers. And I follow the bending of the body to write that long phrase I have had in my mind sometimes for weeks. While a computer is anonymous in each of its pixels and papers is always similar, the human body is not. Mehdi's foot, his leg, his ribs, his torso are never identical to Axel's or Pierre's. Maya's hands can not only look like Emilia or Felina, but cannot be confused with those. And if I write on Ina or Laurent's faces, they are very few elements would make them similar. I write with the right hand, and with the left hand I'm holding the opposite part of the body on which I am writing. When I write on a face, my left hand holds the person's neck. I am so close to him or to her that I can feel her beating, blood running through their veins. I perceive some light sweat from the skin that communicates with my own skin, which sweats as well. I feel the breath coming from the nose or the mouth. I feel the hair's texture and the back of the neck in my hand, the hair on the neck's skin, the roughness of its pores. I see the eyes moving under the eyelids. I see the pupil dilatation and the iris color specific to each ethnic group I'm writing on. When I write on a body part, I can feel the spasm of each muscle, the tension, the release, the trust that the model gains for each of my gestures, which joins my own trust to make sure that the model will not move at any inappropriate moment. I feel the weariness, the experience of each of the bodies who are marked with sometimes very deep scars and bruises. I feel the freshness of a painted, tanned body, also the smell that the sun leaves on their skin. I feel the biting smell of the cold winter air that stays between their hairs. I feel the shivers running through the skin and the pores dilating as my hand goes over them. I feel the temperature rising or dropping inside the body before the model even realizes it. I have seen teardrops running down a model's temples while I was writing on his forehead. I have felt the skin on men and women's lower back tensing up while I drew the stuff. I have felt the rougher skin under the dancers' feet, which shows their work on their own bodies. I have written on mature and expressive body beyond each pose I could ask of them. And going back to my very previous experiences about Asian calligraphy or Asian art, if I were in Asia, in China, in Japan, they would say I write on the chi, like the Tai Chi. In our own continent, Europe, I say to you that I write on people's soul, on their spirit, on the living energy that we call the body. So now you can perfectly understand that none of this can be done in any place, at any moment, in any manner. If a sacred place is the one where we humans identify the cohabitation of forces that are as mystical and out of reach as they are powerful, and that we cannot explain, then it is where artistic creation takes place. And from antiquity to the current day, sacred places have been ruled by writing as the best way to get the transcendency. Art represents pure transcendency, without any precise object or goal, without any other necessity than the existence of individual expression. So when I am writing on a body, I have prepared space and time in a not neutral but very specific way, putting an emphasis on will, on strength, so that the sacredness of the bodies is united to the sacredness of writing. Cleaning the skin, wiping it, covering the private body parts while I'm writing, constantly asking the model, almost like a litany, if everything is alright, moving the body just like in a slow dance. Breathing together, inhaling together, whispering to each other, because speaking disturbs this dance made of writing and breathing. Taking inspiration from the energy of the living body. All this needs a specific time and a designated time schedule. Since I have been writing on bodies, I can clearly remember each composition, when I wrote it, where I wrote it, and mostly who I wrote it on. I remember François' mainly strength when he strikes the pose of a Titan, or Peiju when she crouches to take a scorpion's shape. I remember the skin pores under Mady's beard and Simon Hiley's skin. I remember Kathy's green eyes and Kaja black eyes. I feel the heat of the summer sun on Anaïs's skin and the cold on Marie's skin, as if the winter snow was breathing. I remember the poses, the position, the tensions, the awkwardness, the lack of inhibition from the male and female model who participate in a phase of a musical creation for hours or entire days. I don't know honestly any paper that can show all of this, and I don't know for sure any pixel that can show all of this. Often people ask me if I write straight from the beginning of the session to the end without any correction. As I told you before, I cannot make corrections, there is no the undo function. But from a session with the model to another, I allowed myself to rewrite a session if I'm not satisfied of what I have written, of course. It happens often that on a model I write only pre-compositional material, some chords, some melodic profile, some rhythms, and I perfectly know that I have to wait for a next model to complete the score, because this is my way of practicing now. And as it is the case with other situations, when the composition is ready, I fix it on a specific person, and it happens to me to rewrite the same musical passage on several different models. Another ritual is that when I finish the session of Bodyscore, I sign it and I date it. I mean, I write the date and my signature, and this is a difference, main difference between musicians, composers and photographers. Photographers cannot sign their picture when they take it. To the contrary, composers always sign their music. The last ritual, or let's say also the last kind of pictures I take, is the one where I'm with the model. It's sort of selfie that I do by myself, or sometimes are the witnesses of the performances that take this kind of pictures, in which I am close to the models in a sort of neutral situation, neutral position. And this kind of souvenir is to end this particular performance, and I'm sure that soon I will do an exhibition, a photo exhibition, only with the selfies photos. More and more there are some museums, galleries or concert hall that ask me to do live Bodyscore performances. It means that they want to see me write on the stage with the models, but mainly they want to listen at the music with some musician that read the score immediately after I have written it. So I did many experiences, and I reached a result now that I don't want to banalize my music. As the musicians who read my music on the stage, they do a first reading, because in a way they discovered the score, and they cannot perform correctly my music, because as you perfectly understand, I do not write easy music or easy simple music. My music needs a certain number of hours of practice, as any kind of so-called contemporary or classical music. For this reason, I don't want to banalize my writing, so generally when I do the live performances, writing score, body score, I work with the musician in order to be sure that he understands what I'm writing, and mainly I refer to several compositions he already knows. So in a way, the live body score performances are variations, predefined variations that the musician discovers on the stage, but in a way he or she already knows it. This because otherwise the playing would be something, I don't know, I could not feel satisfied to a first reading of my music. So I hope that I answered to your questions. I took the time to describe as much as I can the Bodyscore project. Yes, of course, I do use the computer. I use the computer to create new sounds. I use the computer to make interactivity, to make generativity. I'm wearing all the time the sensor to keep me connected to the web because of the Argo project. So I use the computer when I have to do these kind of things. But I use the Bodyscore project, I invented this one when I want to feel the others. In my aesthetics, the most important goal for me to compose music is to understand myself among the others. And a way I found out to feel the others is writing music on them. So when I compose, I use this practice, Bodyscore. I write on men and women. But when I do concerts, of course, I use the computer. So I hope to have answered to you and to have given several examples of this project.